interested in. Then we're going to get into some pretty cool stuff around resuming old runs. So, what do you do if a student gets logged out halfway through the scenario or halfway through the simulation? How do they pick up where they left off? And then finally, we're going to deal with one of the features that I get a lot of requests for, which is how do I show the comparison of run results? How do I show multiple runs on the same graph? So in order to understand what we're doing today, there's a couple of key concepts that are important for you to have in your mind. And the most important one for today is, what is a simulation run? And so a run is this, is this abstract kind of idea, if you really think about it, that we created, which really is all about the data produced by a simulation. So runs are created when a simulation starts, so the first time a simulation is loaded, and any time a simulation is reset. So after you go from, the simulation being at end time, let's say the end time is 10, to the simulation then being at time 0, you've generated a new run. You started a new run. And what a run contains is the decisions made by the user while running the simulation, the results based on those decisions, and a whole bunch of metadata, which you'll find really important about for sorting, by who ran the simulation, what time they ran it, if they entered any name descriptions about it. And the final key concept about runs is saving them. What exactly does it mean to save a run, and how does Simulate do that? So when you save a run, which is a really important concept, because a lot of the time you want to store data so that it's viewable later, is you're telling Simulate to put that run in the database. And so what that means is that you're only saving a run once. You don't need to save it 10 different times, because save isn't storing results at a particular point in real time, but rather it ensures that any decisions and results made or generated by that run are stored for future use. So save is really kind of, think of it as a flag on a run object. It's either saved or it's not saved. You don't have to worry about saving results after every step. Simulate takes care of that for you. All you have to do is tell Simulate that you're really interested in saving that particular set of user decisions and user results. So with no further ado, let's dive in and get started. And what we're going to be doing today is building on a bunch of the work that you guys have done in the past on the Jevons paradox model. And so what I'm going to do real quick is go to the Find Sims and go to Michael's copy of the Jevons paradox simulation and copy it and begin building our user interface on top of it. So I've navigated to Michael's sim here, and I click the copy button. And it prompts me to name my simulation. So this is going to be the Jevons Paradox Week 3. And I'm not assigning this to an author. This is an administrator function, and I'm just copying this simulation into my account. So now I have my own copy of Jevons Paradox. And if we look here, we can see that the model that you all have written is here. And if we were to go to explore the model, we'd see all that too. But here's the new interesting stuff. This is the UI designer. This is what I'm talking to you about today mainly. So this is one of two approaches for developing user interfaces on Forio Simulate. This is the most common approach by a large margin because it's so easy and you don't have to be a programmer to do it. The other ways would be using the REST-based APIs directly, which this is built on top of. And using those, you could build your own free-form simulation that is not constrained by the constraints of the UI designer. So let me describe to you a little bit of the overview about how the UI designer works, and then I'll give you a little bit of context about the game we're going to be building today. So first off, over here on the left, we have all of our objects. And the objects are separated out by type. So there's the charts, there's the decisions, there's text, images, and video, all sorts of components for navigating, some basic drawing objects, and then this fancy box over here, which is the premium component. These are the components that are used at levels basic and above, and we'll get into that later on in the webinar. Over here on our right is our page list. This is kind of like PowerPoint. So I've got a slide here or a page here, which represents a page in my sim, and I can continue to add more pages. Down here we have the templates. Think of them as your slide masters. So whatever you put on a template will show up on any page that inherits from that template. And you can control that all through that little settings button. So here we can change the template for our default page. Next, what's really important to realize is we're going to be flipping through this tab navigator over here on the left a lot. Here is where all of the settings are. When you have no object selected, it shows this complicated document settings pane. But when you add an object, and so let's start out by adding a line chart, it flops over to this settings pane, which contains all of the widgets that you need to set up this widget for use in your simulation. So since we've added on the line chart, let's start out by configuring it. And the game that we're building today is all about having users play the role of a state regulator. And they're making decisions or policies about refrigerators' efficiencies. Rather, so we aren't presenting Jevons paradox as the main idea behind the game. We're letting that concept be discovered through use in the simulation. So what we're presenting ourselves as is a simulation where you're making policies about the effectiveness, the efficiency of refrigerators. So the most important variable that we're going to want to show to people is actually going to be total yearly spending on electricity. So what I did is I typed into that variable name input the name of the variable I want on the graph, and it graphs it for me. And so what you'll notice here is that the number format, or the number on this graph, is so huge that it's actually being cut off by the bounds of the chart. And what I suggest that we do is actually change the number format on the y-axis so it's a bit more readable. One of my favorite number formats is the short format. It makes it a lot easier to tell what's going on. So rather than typing, 2 trillion, it'll just say 2T, where T means trillion. So what we're going to do is go over to the title and axis settings, and we're going to uncheck this checkbox that says use first variable number format, because by default it uses the number format that's associated to the first variable in the chart. And so by unchecking that, it enables this y-axis number format input, and we type in this number format S3. And let me zoom in for a second so that you can clearly see what that changed. So you can see here now that total yearly spending on electricity is now formatted using B's and M's as opposed to really long comma-separated numbers with decimals. I don't know about you, but I don't really care about cents when I'm working with billions of dollars. All righty, great. So now we've set up our line chart, and this is our output indicator. What we need to do now is set up a way for people to enter in inputs, and then we need to give people a way to change simulation state. So let's go back to add a component and decision inputs. These are all of the decision inputs that we can use to have users change state within the model. So I'm going to drag out the text decision because text boxes are a really common format for entering decisions. And what I'm going to do here is select the kilowatt of electricity consumed, and I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger so that we can see, kilowatt of electricity consumed per cubic foot of refrigerators. And the reason why I chose refrigerators is because this simulation is all about setting refrigerator efficiencies. So let's change this ugly label, which is by default the variable name, into something nice, like refrigerator. I always want to put a D in refrigerator. Kilowatt electricity consumed per cubic foot. This way, it looks a little bit more friendly to our users. The bracket syntax really isn't all that intuitive to users. So now I'm going to zoom out so that I have a better idea of what my UI looks like. Close this pane up a bit. And so now we have the ability for users to enter in a decision, and we have a graph showing the results. The final thing we need to do is add some buttons to change simulation state. So we're going to add 3 buttons. The first button is so that you can step the simulation 1 unit in time into the future. So I'm going to change the button label to step 1. This means that when the user presses this button, the simulation will go forward 1 year in time. And to do that, I go to the Actions pane, I select the step action, and in this Time Units to Advance box, I type in the number of years I want the simulation to advance. Since I want 1, and it pre-fills to 1, we're set. Next, let's make the Step to End button. And what we do is we choose the button like we did before. Let's change its label, And let's have this button say Finish. And here, rather than using the step action, we're going to use the step to end action. And what this will do is it will finish off the simulation from whatever point in time you're currently at. And then finally, what we need is a way for people to reset the simulation when they reach the end of the game. Because without a reset button, there's no way to generate a new run. So let's select the reset simulation action and give this button a name like reset. So now we've built the most simple basic sim we can build on top of this model. Let's quickly publish that, check it out, see what it looks like, make sure we're happy with it, and then we'll get into using the financial table and some discussions about how data tables work within the Simulate UI Designer. And so here now we have our running simulation, and what we can do is we can enter in the kilowatts of electricity consumed per cubic foot, and so let's enter in a number like 30. We can step the simulation forward a unit in time, or we can finish it. We can then reset it and begin it again. So now we have our most basic simulation set up. We're good there. Let's go in now and add some nice table results. One of the components that we feel is kind of a hidden thing is the financial table. It's got this funny name, financial table. You would really think that a financial table would be used for finance data. It turns out that that is a bit of a misnomer. It's really a data table like any other, except what it offers you is the ability to show data for specific numbers of periods, including just the current period. And this is in opposition to the regular data table. So let me just put down a regular data table here for a second. So this is what a regular data table looks like. And if we wanted to graph something, display something in the table, we would select that variable, and it would produce a table that looks like this. And this component isn't that customizable. This is really the extent of it. You can have a horizontal table, a vertical table, and it always shows you all of time. But with a financial table, we have a bunch of extra options about how to set it up. So I'm going to select the financial table, place it on the screen. Let's resize it a bit. And let's add some variables into this table. And the table and the variables that we want in this table is the average size of all of the components that we've modeled within this sim. So the average refrigerator size. And as you can see here, it's made a little table here where we've got the variable name, the year, and then the result. Let's add a new row for the average size of the freezer. And then let's add a new row for the average size of the basement refrigerator. And so now we have the average size of all of our 3 refrigerators, and if we wanted to, we could reorder these rows by just dragging them in this list over here. And this is a really helpful, handy hint. Almost all lists like this within the UI Designer settings pane are draggable to reorder like that. So keep that in mind when you make a mistake in ordering data. Sometimes if you want it to change order, you can just do that by dragging. So now let's make this table a little bit longer. And in this table, we want to show some overtime data. And what I really want to show in this table is 5 periods worth of data. And I do that by going to the table settings and selecting the number of periods being equal to 5. And what it does is it shows us the last 5 periods of data. See, it tracks back from 2040 to 2036. And what I'd like to do, rather than showing the last 5, I would like to show in increments of 5. So now we can see here it goes from 2040 to 2035 to 2030. And this way the data is at more even points corresponding to the x-axis values visible on this chart. Then let's come in and add just a couple more things to this financial table, a couple of more variables. around the total yearly spending on electricity and the price of electricity. And with the financial table, you have some control over the background borders and things like that. And so what I want to do is I want to add a border line in between the average basement refrigerator size and the next variable I'm going to be adding to this table, which is the price of kilowatt of electricity. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the single border, and it draws us a nice little line here so that when we add our new row that displays price of kilowatt of electricity, we get a nice little border separating line here. And let's add our final data series, which is the same as what's in our graph. And now we have our financial table set up. And what's really cool about this table is that you can right-click on it and pull all the data out and stick it in Excel. So let me show you that in a running sim. So let's go ahead and publish our financial table and see how it works in the real world as we're stepping by one step at a time and when we step at the end. Great. So now let's just go ahead and step by one. So here it's showing us our current time unit and then the previous time unit that there's data for. And as we step here, it'll go until it hits an increment of 5, and then it'll jump back. And so here you'll notice that everything is separated by 5 and then the first step. And so we can continue to step, and boom. So now we keep going forward until we get to the end. And then we see our data separated like we saw it in the UI Designer. And what we can do with this data is copy it and then make a new spreadsheet and paste that data right on in. And if I select it all and size it right, we'll see it all. So you can copy all of the data that comes from your simulation into Excel using this technique. So you can also do the same thing on graphs. So this right-click menu is important in a running simulation. And so now we've set up some of our tables and some of our charts. Let's go on and actually start debriefing this simulation. Let's go into what happens when the user reaches the end of the simulation. Right now, you just play the game, you see some numbers, you don't really know what's going on. You don't really know what you're doing as a user. Let's try and give some context to our users. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a new page for the debrief. And what I'm going to do is since we're going to have multiple pages in the simulation, I'm actually going to start naming them. So this is going to be the debrief, and this is going to be the game page. And on our debrief page, what we're going to want to do is turn our reset button here into a debrief button. So we're going to move the debrief, we're going to move the reset from this page over to the debrief because we don't want to reset the run until after they've done their debrief. So now, let's actually go quickly change the action on this button. So rather than resetting the simulation directly, it's going to go to page, debrief. So now on our debrief page, we need to add a whole bunch of information. What we want to do is add a header to this page so that people know what this page is, and we can do that by going over to the text, dragging it out, putting it in the upper right-hand corner, and typing. We can make it nice and big and bold. That way, people can clearly see what they're doing. Then, we want to add some text. And so an interesting thing to think about is what do we want this text to say? We really need this text to be conditional based on what's happened in the simulation. We don't want to tell people that they've done a good job when they've done a bad job, and we don't want to tell people that they've done a bad job when in fact they've done a good job. So what we've done is in here we've just defined two states for how a simulation can end up, good and bad. And so we have this thing called conditionals, which allows you to do exactly that. So what we can do here is we can type in some text to display when a certain variable is equal to, or any of the other logical functions, a certain value. So I've got some preset text which I'm going to use for the debrief. So let me quickly grab that from a little text file of pre-written information which we'll send out to you after this webinar. Okay. And so here's my page of all the text. And so here, let's put in the default state of you did badly. And so what we can do is fill in the default text with the bad text. And let's space this out. All right, and let's make this text just a little bit bigger. So by default, we're going to tell everybody that they did poorly. And then what we can do is we can conditionalize the case where they did well. So this is the you've done poorly text. Let's set up the you've done well text. So let me go grab that text from the congratulations little box here. And let me separate it out with the returns again. It looks like a text that it wasn't preserving my return keys. And then what we want to do is we want to display this text when the total yearly spending on electricity is less than, and then I found out a good number last night or over the past couple of days when I've been building this simulation, and that's 2.9 billion. So rather than type out all those zeros, I just copied that here, and we can add that here. So now what I've done is I said when total yearly spending on electricity is less than 2.9 billion, display congratulations, you've done really well. Otherwise, by default, it's going to display the default text, which is too bad, you've messed this up. So there's more than just text that we can do these conditionals on. We can also do them on videos. And what's really cool about this is that you can have different videos show up based on how people have done. So let's keep the video that we make in sync with the text that we're showing. So there was 2 YouTube videos that I picked out for this simulation. And the first one is a discussion about Jevons paradox. Since we're not actually telling people about Jevons paradox when they play the game, and we're letting them discover that on their own, when they do poorly, it's because they were hit by the effects of Jevons paradox. And so I found this video here, which is a good video describing Jevons paradox. So by default, we're going to display this Jevons paradox video, which, as you can see here, is just a regular video I scraped off of YouTube of some kid for one of his class projects talking about Jevons paradox. Now, in the conditionals, what we're going to want to do is display a video for when they do well. And this video is going to be a little bit of a surprise. It's a bit funny. And so this is another video that I pulled off YouTube. And we'll see this video in just a second that gets played when you do well. And then what we want to do is we want to say it's the same condition that we were using on the text. That way the text and the video both are in the same state. They both show good at the same time, and they both show bad at the same time. Great. So now we have a debrief page, which has some text about how you did, a video helping to debrief your performance in the simulation, and all we need to do now is add a play again button so that we can play again. And this play again button will be the button that does the reset and brings you back to the game page. Great. So let's quickly publish this and check out what we've got here. So now when we run the simulation, we can just quickly finish it. We can hit the debrief button, and we get congratulations. We've done it well. And when we play it, And I don't know if you'll be able to get the sound here, but we get the Celebrate Good Times video from, I don't know if that comes in through my mic, but you can see, we've done well and we're celebrating and everything is good. And then we can come back, and if we play again, oh, I forgot the go to page action on this button. So it doesn't bring me back to my page. So let's quickly fix that. And I realized that there was another thing that I forgot to do, which was hide that debrief button when we're not actually at the end of the simulation. I was too much in a hurry to show you the Celebrate Good Times video. So let's finish setting up the actions on this button. So we'll have it reset the simulation and bring you back to the game page. Then this debrief button, we don't want it to show up during the whole time that you're running the simulation. What we want to do is conditionally show it. So we want to make the button invisible when the run.step is less than the run.end step. And so what this says is if the run is not complete, make sure this button is invisible. And these little bracket $sign variables are used to gather internal state about the model that isn't a model variable. And so now, if we republish the simulation, we'll be able to play it multiple times, and I can show you what the video about Jevons paradox looks like when we do poorly. And after that, what we're going to want to move up to is some of the basic features that come with the pay-for accounts. And so here now, our button is hidden, and nobody knows it exists until we finish the simulation, we get the debrief, and this time we did well again. Let's do poorly this time. And here we get a video of the guy explaining what Jevons paradox is. And so now we've got our sim set up, the gameplay and the debrief. So let's go on and pretend that this is all, really private data that we don't want to share with anybody, which in this case isn't the truth. But let's just go with it as an example of me showing you how to do that if that's what you're interested in. To do that, what we need to do is we need to jump into the settings pane. Because I'm an administrator, I have some superpowers to upgrade my sim automatically to basic. This is not a settings page that you have, but you can do through purchasing a basic subscription. Then what you will get access to is this Features tab, where we can go in and set up some of the user access settings. For instance, users must subscribe to the simulation in order to run it. I'm going to keep it so that everybody can copy the model, but pardon me, there's other options here about preventing people from copying the model when you go from basic and above. And then finally, there's other options about allowing people to self-subscribe to the simulation and whether or not the simulation will be visible in Find Sims. So I'm going to save those changes to my settings. And now that means that the only way you can run this sim is if you're authorized to run it through the user access page. And this is something in the user access page that we'll cover later on. But what I want to cover with you right now is the settings that you need to do inside of the UI designer to enable the login. So let's jump back to the user interface designer, and let's add a new page for the login. And rather than calling it page 2, let's just call it the login page. And then we can drag that to be the first page in the list. And what we're going to want to add to this page is a premium component, which is now enabled, login components. So you can just pull off a login component as one big component. You'll notice here it's got this big space, and this is for messages when people fail to authenticate properly. That's what this big white space is all about. And so what we can do now is add a nice little piece of text telling people that this is the refrigerator this is the refrigerator efficiency simulation. Make it bold, big, centered, and place it here. And then we need to set up what happens when people actually log into the simulation. To do that, we go to the Actions pane, and we set what is the user's destination when they log in, the game page. What is the facilitator's destination, the game page. This distinction between user and facilitator we'll get into, especially coming in the next week. The final piece of setup that we have to do is actually in the onload simulation pane in the document settings panel. What we need to do is set up how the sim loads. So if the user isn't logged in, we want to bring them to the login page. If a user is logged in, we want to bring them to the game page. And if the facilitator is logged in, we want to bring them to the game page. There's no need to have these people re-authenticate every time that they reload the simulation. If they're logged in, just skip the login page. So now, what we're going to want to do is add a logout link to each of these other pages so that we can test our login functionality. And to do that, we can add a component, text, and stick it using this action, log out of simulation, destination, login page, in the upper right-hand corner of our pages. So I'm going to make this look like a nice login component, logout component. There we go. And rather than log in, it's actually log out. And let's make it underlined because that's what people expect links to look like. And so what we can do with this now is, now that we've set it up, we don't have to reset it up for every page. We can just copy it, select the new page, and paste it. And now we end up with the same component on both pages. And now what we can do is publish the sim and test and make sure that me as an author is able to log into my own simulation, because we haven't granted access to anybody else yet through the User Access tab. Okay, so I can log out here and then log in again. And I'm good. Great. So now what we're going to need to do is set up some of the run archive that I was telling you about before. So having it so that after you log out and you log back in, you can resume runs that you haven't completed. So in order to do that, what we're going to want to do is actually save some data about the simulation into the database when we save a run. So in this step of in the development is when we're going to actually start saving data to the Simulate database. So let's jump here to the Edit Model Equations, and let's mark our key indicator that we're referencing as a save result. And what this means is that anytime we save this run, we're going to save all values of yearly spending on electricity to the database. And what that means is that this variable will now be accessible in tables that are showing you results across multiple runs, in graphs that are showing you data across multiple runs. So if I'm showing a user a list of runs that they've run in the past, and I want to give them some context information about that run, about how they were doing, what I would need to do is mark those variables as saved. And in this case, there's one key variable that we need to mark as saved, which is the total yearly spending on electricity. But for instance, if the number of households in state was a fluctuating number that was really important, we would want to do the same thing where we would type P, number of households in state equal dot save result equals true. We want to mark every variable that we want stored to the database as a save result. And so now I'm going to save this model, and I'm going to come back to the simulation and add in the Run Archive page. So again, we're just going to create a simple new page, and this is going to be the Manage Runs. And on this, let me pull the same title text that I've been using on the debrief. That way I don't have to restyle it. Let me place a title on the game page. And then let me place the same style of title on this page. Great. And what we want to do on this page is we want to present users a list of all of the runs that they've run in the past. To do that, I go to the premium components, and I select the run table. And what this does is it shows people a list of all of their runs. So to make it a little bit wider, and on this run table, what I want to do is I want to show people their name so that they can be sure that they were the ones who created that run. We want to show them the creation time. What day of the week, time of day did they create this simulation? The current time, which is the time that they're at in the simulation. So if they're in 2010 versus 2050. The name of the run. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some functionality so that people can name and describe their runs. So we'll want that to show up in this table. The run description. Then we're going to want to show them what their current value of total yearly spending on electricity is. This is where that save result comes in handy. If we didn't do that save result step, we wouldn't have access to this variable here. And so now we've added that to the list. And finally, we want to give people the option to resume this run or delete this run. So to do that, it's the same operation in the column type. Resume run. And then delete run. Great. And so now we have some options down here about what happens when we resume the run. And when we resume the run, we don't want people to go to the login page. We actually want them to go to the game page so that they can see exactly where they were in that run. Now, if we look at this table right now, it's blank. And that's because we haven't saved any of the previous runs that we have run. And so what that means is that we actually need to create a button to start a new simulation for the first time. And to do that, we just go to Actions. And if you remember what I was saying earlier in the presentation about creating a new run, we'll actually be using a reset action. So this will just create a brand new run, skipping the resume run process. And what we want to do when people click this button is reset, and then go to the page, the game page. And the final thing that we want to do now is actually integrate this manage run page into the simulation flow. And to do that, we need to change that in both places where we set up what happens after you log in. We want to change the user destination to manage runs, the facilitated destination to manage runs. That way when they log in, they see their manage run screens. And we're also going to want to change those document settings on load to the manage runs page. So if the user is already logged into the simulation, rather than showing them the login page, let's just show them the manage runs page. And then finally, what we want to do is make this manage run page match the others by grabbing this logout link and placing it along, just like that. Next, what we're going to want to do is actually make runs get saved. And to do that, there's a save run action. So we select that action from the list of actions. And so now every time you step the model, we're going to make sure that that run is saved. Because you remember, we only need to save a run once. Any duplicate calls to save run won't necessarily do anything good, but they won't do anything bad. So it's okay to have just lots of extra calls to save run. It always ensures that your run is stored. And so we're going to want to save the run when they step. We're going to want to save the run when they finish. And then when they click the debrief button, here is where we're going to want them to name and describe their run. So what we're going to do is have them name and describe their run before they go to the next page. Excuse me. And so now, we've set up our saving of simulations and our run archive. So let's publish. And it's going to bring us to our blank Manage Runs page. And what we're going to want to do is run a couple of runs and then do some run describing. And I'm going to show you some cool features that you get for free inside of the run table as a part of that run table. So right now it's blank. So we're just going to start out by creating a new run. I'm going to run this run. I'm going to debrief it. And it gives me this pop-up box to enter in my run name and my run description. So here I'm just going to say test run, and this is the model default. Excuse me. And so now I can play again. And if we log out, it'd actually be pretty helpful if we had a Manage Runs link on that page. And we log back in, it'll show us our Manage Runs page. And so here's that run that we ran. I can't resume it because it's at the end. But if I want to, I can click here and change the name. You know what? You know, this really isn't my test run. This is my super awesome run. And so now that name appears. So let's go back into the simulation and create a new run. And let's bail out halfway through. That way I can show you what it looks like when you resume a run. So I got, part of the way through. I'm going to bail. And then I'm going to come back in. So by default, we see the blank run name and the blank run description, and this resume run button. So now when we click this button, it brings us back exactly showing us the data that we were looking at before. So we're set there. Now let's go back into the simulation and build the run compare, which is the final feature that we have on the docket for today. So let's go ahead now and jump into the interface. And this is where we're going to set it up so that you can have multiple runs appearing on that graph so that our policymakers can compare how they did in their super awesome run versus their test run. So let's jump in and start out by going to this graph and saying that, you know what, we really want this graph to show compared data. So we flick off that checkbox, and what it did is, as you see, it added this legend here for us, and it's now set it up so that it's runnable, so that it'll show data for multiple runs. Excuse me for just 1 second here. Much better. So what we can do now is we don't need to show the variable name in the legend. If we just blank out the variable name in the legend, it shows us the name of the current run, which by default is current run. This way, when users look at this legend, what they're seeing is the names of the runs as opposed to the name of the variable parentheses, the name of the run. Because that gets really long and repetitive, especially considering all variables on this graph are going to be total yearly spending on electricity. Something important to remember about compare run graphs is that they require the data that's in them to be marked as save result, and that you can't have 2 series worth of data, 2 or more, on the graph. It'll prevent you from checking off the compare runs option. And that's because it's very easy to build up lots and lots of lines on this graph as you check off more and more runs to compare. And if you had 2 variables that you were comparing across 5 runs, you'd have 10 lines on the graph, and it'd be just impossible to read. Let's format our legend really quickly. So rather than by being the default horizontal, let's make it vertical. That way we have some room to show a bunch of other runs in this tab, in this graph. That's the word I'm looking for. Also, while we're at this page, we really wanted a button to get back to the Manage Runs. So let's add that here now and save ourselves the sweat of logging in and logging out. And this will just directly bring us to the Manage Runs page. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change the order of the debrief button and the Manage Runs button so that there isn't a blank spot in our user interface when the debrief button is invisible. Great. So now we're set there. All we have to do is make it so that now people can select which runs they want to appear on this graph. So we've set it up so this graph can display multiple runs, but we haven't given users the option to do it yet. So let's go back to this Manage Runs page and give them the ability to do that. So I'm going to shrink that table down a bit because we're going to use about half the real estate on this page for the Compare Run table, which is another premium component. We drag it out like that, and it comes out all nice and pre-formatted. And there we go. And so it's showing the 2 runs that I've run already, and it gives me the option to check them off and confirm that I want to compare them. So I'm going to leave the confirm selection alone, and what we could do is this, if we wanted to, when you confirm which runs you want to compare, we can have that directly link you into the game page, but I'm going to leave it as going to no particular page, so that if you want, you can select a bunch of runs you want to compare, then resume a run, so that all in one page you can select all of the data that you want to appear on that graph. And there we go. So now I think we've got it set up so that we can do some run comparison. So as the sim publishes, I just wanted to thank you all for coming, and as we're coming towards the end of the webinar. And we've got a couple of minutes of wrap-up, and as always, you'll get all of this material in your email. But now that our sim is published, let me actually get back to the sim before I finish off the workshop. And yeah, we also have questions, and I have a bunch of things that I'd like you guys to consider in the coming week. Because there's a couple of mistakes or amateur mistakes that I've made when building the simulation that I want you to see if you can figure out. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare my 2 runs. I'm going to mark them as runs that are going to be loaded for comparison. And then I'm going to create a new run. And on this, we can see I've got all of my runs. And as we highlight over the legend, it shows us where those runs are on the graph. So right now they all overlap because they're all the same. But if I change this one, we can see how it's different. And I can debrief on it, and I'll call this the different one. And we did poorly in this. And I can go back to Manage Runs, and I can, uncheck that one, check that one, load those for comparison, and start a new game. So this is where I want to leave the user interface for today. So let me jump back into PowerPoint for just a moment. And let's do a little bit of wrap-up and get some questions from you guys. So the challenges for the coming weeks would be to extend this simulation. Right now, we only gave people the ability to set refrigerator efficiencies. But policymakers could also set freezer efficiencies. So how would you go about adding that decision to the simulation? Also, think about other ways that users could be entering their decisions. I just chose the text input because that's something that's super common. But does it really make the most amount of sense in this case? What if you wanted to really limit the range of values that users were able to enter? What component would you use then? Because right now the text input is just boundless. You can enter in -1 million, and you could have the most